the parents in the way are kind of in this sort of like muddled kind of gray area with parenting. Whereas when their teen was a kid or child, they really had to do a lot of fixing or providing a
Mhm,
solution. You know, when their teen
mhm,
when their teen was a baby, if the
mhm,
baby is crying, they're not going to say like, "Let's talk about it. How can I
mhm,
support you?"
mhm,
They're going to give them the bottle. They're going to change their
mhm,
diaper. They're going to
mhm,
take all those actions.
mhm,
And now the parents have to kind of relearn how to
mhm.
parent, and they're like, "Well, my teenager, I still think of them kind of like a kid, but they're kind of like an adult," that it's really hard for the parents.
Welcome everyone to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast. Today is the 51st episode. Super psyched. I may have actually messed that up. I'm not sure. I think it's 51. If any of the super fans out there want to fact check me, please hit me up. Super excited to have with me Sophia Vale Galano, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She's another OG in the parent game like myself. She's been working with teens for over a decade, helping parents navigate right more effectively, similarly in a way to the work I do. And works specifically with teens. She's got an amazing book out there called Calming Teenage Anxiety: A Parent's Guide to Helping Your Teenager Cope with Worry. Did I get that right?
Yes, perfect. I know. I
Awesome.
know there are a lot of words there.
Whew. No, it's all good. So, and we're
Keep
gonna
you on
we're
your
gonna
toes.
yeah, the theme of today. So for folks listening, so you know what the heck you're gonna get out of today, is really about how do we be curious, right, versus reactive. How do we suspend sort of disbelief? Which I don't know if I did the best on that this morning with my teenager in the car ride. Kind of jumped into no, immediate snap no. And so we're going to talk a lot about that, of course, go in many different places. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Yeah.
It's we're 3 hours apart here, so good morning to you. On the and I should mention, which Sophia will of course shout out. How you can reach out to her at the end. But she's in LA. She's West Coast, and I'm East Coast here. So,
We're meeting in the middle.
are you like a support? Are you a sports fan at all, or no, or yes? Don't
You
care.
know, not as much as the rest of my family is, we'll put it
Hmm.
that way. They are hardcore East Coast sports fans,
Really,
actually. So if that tells
really.
you anything, we have season tickets to the New York Giants. We live in Los Angeles, if that, says anything. So obviously
Ah,
my family is in a, not such good emotional state right now. So they
yes,
could
yes,
benefit from some, maybe sports psychology podcasts.
yes. There you go.
Uh,
There you go. There you go.
but yes, but I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to chat, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, so we do similar work. I mean, I of course coach parents, and correct me if I'm. You're sitting there across a lot of angsty teens all day
Oh
long,
yeah. Hmm.
which I do as well. My afternoons are still a lot of angsty teens. My mornings are all the Four Peaks parents, and I've
Hmm.
been in front of angsty teens. Oh my God, since 2002, and I also love them because you know where you stand with them. They're so freaking in
Yes.
the here and now. They're so freaking
Yes.
direct, right?
Yeah.
They're
Mhm.
the
Well
I
said.
always yeah, they're always I always say, to when I used to be in executive roles and supervising, teams of clinicians, I always say they're the best at smelling a rat, like they
Yeah.
are the
Yeah.
ultimate authenticity barometer,
Yes.
right? And they
Yes.
have
So accurate.
amazing EI. And I think that's what makes this conversation even more important because if we're not on top of our game and we're kind of snapping, right? And then we're like,
Yeah.
WTF, why are you snapping at us? Right. It's like we're expecting certain things that we're not necessarily putting out there. So what are the
Totally.
what is the like value? Like give us the big picture, the big sell, and then we could dive into some tactical do's and don'ts and things you've learned. But what's the like give us the sell of suspending judgment and being more curious? Like why is that helpful and or valuable to family?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to preface by recognizing how challenging that is and how, first of all, it goes against our natural instincts as parents to really take this approach of, kind of more curiosity, more inquisitive, seeking to learn. Typically we come from the stance of wanting to fix or wanting to
Hmm.
alleviate a problem. Our teenager, our child is suffering, of course we're going to want to remedy that right away.
Hmm.
The idea of
Hmm.
just kind of sitting back and saying let's learn a little bit more, let's talk about it, is going to feel not only very challenging but also goes against kind of the natural instinct. So I always just let, parents know that it's okay if this is something that feels very difficult
Mhm,
for
mhm,
them. And also I remind parents that if they haven't done this yet, it's okay, that it doesn't mean it's a lost cause. But really, I come from this stance of course, unless it's an emergency situation. So I always like to, throw that out there too, that there are stances, or circumstances where it is appropriate to intervene and step in and provide
mhm,
solutions. And this
mhm,
is, what I talk about is kind of more of a general overview here when it comes to teen anxiety. But really, it's taking this curious approach of seeking to learn more to help your teenager feel that you are there with them, that you are working through it together, that the teen can feel validated, feel heard, and feel that they are starting to be treated more as a young adult and less of a child, which
mhm,
is really important for their growth and development.
mhm,
And ultimately, what that's actually doing, and it can help parents kind of, motivate themselves to take this approach if it's particularly challenging, is it actually is providing a solution in the long run. It's just a bit of a slower process, but it's essential for teens to feel that, their parents aren't saying, "Okay, you're anxious, just go for a walk or just go meditate," or "It's not a big deal." While those are great solutions, the teen really, really appreciates being asked what it's like for them, or they want to hear, "How can I support you? What can I do?" It's
mhm.
going to generate a very different response from the teen.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. I said to a family, last week, I said, uh, when you mouthwash, you don't swallow the mouthwash,
Right.
but you kinda gargle it, right? And
Yes.
then you spit it out, and I was saying, like, just gargle your kid's worldview. Like,
Right.
it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that we have to agree. I think what is a trip up for a lot of families I work with is their kids do present, rationality within, shrouded in irrationality, or
Yes.
maybe there's a cogent point within,
Mhm.
this insanity of I'm supposed to go, fly with some 25-year-old dude when you're a minor to some concert in Ibiza. Well, maybe underneath all that, there is a
Well,
desire for a larger world. And how do we get at that?
sure.
And how, and it's so hard because, like you said, parents' proclivity is to protect.
Of
And
course.
there are times that we rush in too fast.
Yes.
It has a
Yes.
shunting effect on that kiddo's ability to separate, individuate, and then become, right, which is a
Yes.
big protective factor, a big
Right.
asset for them, right, is to have that individuality. What do
Yeah.
you see as, like, I don't know, the big couple of big pitfalls that families are falling into? And also it's a two-way street, right? Like, teens don't necessarily, I always say this, like, it's never like, "Hey mom, hey dad, like, I have a really big thing going on. And what is the best time for you guys for
Yes.
me to, and
Totally.
it kind of cracks me up because last night I usually end my night. I have every day at 3, 4:15, and 5:30. That's more often than not a life coaching or therapy client. And my mornings are all Four Peaks parents. And this teen, he immediately walks in. He's like, "I got nothing," And I said, "You know what sucks about our sitch is, like,
Yeah.
I schedule you on a schedule. I see you every other week or
Yeah.
weekly, and that shit doesn't really conform to your life. So, like, let's just
Right.
embrace the suck." And then this same teen also texted me, like, in crisis, like,
Of
3 weeks
course.
ago on a Sunday, of course,
Of
where
course.
it's
Of
like,
course. Yes.
so there's always this, like, mismatch on the timing side. So what are some pitfalls that you see parents falling into that's preventing them, right, from holding that space to be that much more curious and ensue this awesome, healthier dialogue that you're talking about?
Yes, yes. So, I really appreciate you bringing up that example of even,
Mhm,
kind of joking that, a teen is not going to sit down and say, when is a really
mhm,
good time for us to, discuss this and
mhm,
explore this? Because,
mhm,
I remind parents of this all the time, and it kind of sounds like a no brainer, but often when I remind parents, they, laugh and they say, oh, yeah, of course, but the first piece is remembering that teens are not expert communicators.
mhm,
So oftentimes, a teen is is actually communicating that they're struggling or that they're suffering, and a parent, and not from, a place of ill intent, or because they're wanting to hurt their teen, but they disregard it, or it's
Mhm.
minimized because
Mhm.
it's not communicated in
Mhm.
a way that's translatable for an
Mhm.
adult.
Mhm.
So a lot of my work is, helping parents understand that, okay, a teen suffering might not look the same way as an adult suffering. The teen is not going to sit down and say, Mom, Dad, I could really benefit from some more emotional regulation techniques
Mhm.
and coping
Mhm.
skills and,
Mhm.
positive
Mhm.
outlets. And no, I always
Mhm.
joke that I'm like, if there is a teen like that, I would love to meet them.
Mhm.
I haven't come
Mhm.
across that yet.
Mhm.
Um, they're going to express it in a way that everything sucks. I don't want to do this. I hate this. This person is out to get me. I don't want
Mhm.
to go to school. I want to drop out of this club. And it's really easy to confuse that also with kind of standard teenage behavior. So, that's kind of the second piece of this too, is that, it's very challenging for parents to also differentiate kind of what's quote unquote normal or
Mhm.
natural adolescent development
Mhm.
versus what's
Mhm.
actually concerning,
Mhm.
because again, it presents very different than it would for an adult in many cases. And also, teens are not expert communicators. So, even just recognizing that piece and then employing this kind of more mindful, non-judgmental approach and really observing the teen again with a lens of compassion,
Mhm.
mindfulness can be very, very helpful. But oftentimes it is just that initial barrier, which is that the parent doesn't really recognize what's actually going on here. It's
Mhm.
like the teen and the parent are speaking two very different
Mhm.
languages.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's even made harder when you're dealing with 3 kids, possibly in a house,
Oh
4
gosh,
kids,
of
possibly in
course.
a house,
Yes.
3, 4, that's 3 or 4 different developmental, spaces. I'm reading actually of Boys and Men right now, which I love. I don't know if you read that book, but you should
Mhm.
check it out. It's
Yeah.
so good about biological differences that are so obvious, and systemic differences as well between challenges that boys, are facing versus girls,
Mhm.
and it's just there's so many. I mean, I have a family I'm working with that has a
Mhm.
child with selective mutism. I have a
Mm.
family that I'm working with this girl who is, oh my God, a terror when it comes to her OCD and seeking
Mm.
reassurance. And so it's so hard for the families I work with to code
Yeah.
switch, because one
Sure.
second I can move toward so and so pretty freely.
Mhm.
The other second, because I have families that have Narcan their sons, or
Yeah.
daughters to prevent an overdose, and there's
Yeah.
fight or flight already there, and there's cortisol, and there's
Mhm. Yeah.
history, and you're in this fight or flight,
Yeah.
situation. What I love about, what you're saying is just that idea of kind of standing inside their shoes, right? Being
Yes.
willing to
Yes.
join with them.
Yes. Yes.
Again, I love I use the mouthwash thing all the time, because I'm always like, you could gargle and then spit it out, like, but at least there's a taste in there. And if you're willing to like stand where they're standing, maybe your perspective shifts.
Yes.
And, however, again, I think families a lot of times thinks validation equals affirmation. I say that all the time. It doesn't.
Mhm.
So you can
Mhm.
validate like,
Mhm.
wow, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry you're going through that. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're signing them up for
Right. Right.
whatever the heck that thing is,
Right. Right.
and
Mhm.
if even if and I have a lot of families, understandably, that have a hard time empathizing with their teen because their come up was way maybe harder or more
Yes.
challenging, or
Absolutely.
they went through the Vietnam War, or they went
Yeah.
through, poverty, or they went through
Right.
whatever, and this kid is, like,
Right.
talking about being left unread for 5 minutes and
Right.
freaking the hell out.
They're like, "What?" They're like,
What?
"Okay, get over it." Yeah, which is
Right.
okay to feel that
Right.
way, it's
It is
sure.
okay,
Okay to feel that.
we
Mhm.
can create grit and resiliency, and again, not over attached to the draw. I always
Yes.
say, like, don't tie a rope to yourself and them, and then jump in their toilet bowl of, like,
Right. Yes.
decompensation, but we could still
Yes.
stand on top of the lid and be like, "Well, that sounds hard. That looks hard. I'm sorry you're going
Yes.
through that," right? Before,
Yes.
like, we're like, "Why the hell did you do that? How dumb are you? It's so obvious that you
Yes.
shouldn't have done." So that's really great. And how do
Yes.
you, like, when you work with the kids, maybe you don't do this, maybe you do, but I think of, like, when I used to, lead a lot of people in corporate in behavioral health, and I had these executive positions. I used to always manage my manager without my manager knowing it, and I used to always
Yes.
tell my staff to manage me, like, "You have to
Yeah.
manage me and teach me how I could support and supervise you." How do you help teens almost manage their parent in a way, in a sense that,
Yes.
they can also now try to create, hopefully, a dyad or a triad, a corrective
Yes.
emotional experience that it works for everybody. I'm not saying the teen is
Yes.
supposed to be responsible for the parent,
Yes. Yes.
your parent's behavior. That's where I come in, right? To raise the emotional
Totally.
intelligence of that parent. But is that something you also try to help teens work with?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So just in the way, and I'm so grateful that you are bringing up this point,
You're
the
too nice,
way
by the way.
oh,
You need
you're like, keep it coming, keep it coming.
I don't get this very often. This is great.
You're like, do you want to come back next week?
I was gonna say it's gonna be
You're
a
welcome
month
anytime.
month with you. 4 episodes in a row. We're doing a package.
Well, these are such important points, and I talk about this a lot in my book too. So maybe I'm also just complimenting myself because I completely agree with what you're
Go for it.
saying here, which is that, I pose these exercises in my book for parents, to really help enhance the empathy of remembering kind of what world the teens are living in, what the world is like, even
Mhm,
if the parents adolescence, their world seemed a lot harder, and it
mhm,
might have been, like off the
mhm,
record, it might have
mhm.
been, it's still
Yeah,
helpful,
yeah,
to remember,
yeah.
what the world is like now for teenagers and
Mhm,
how we have these, new factors that most parents didn't experience in their own adolescence, whether it's technology, social media, what have you. So a big part of my job is helping the parents gain more empathy for the teenagers while not enabling or rescuing, just,
mhm,
still having the
mhm.
compassion. And what my work is with the teen is also helping the teen develop some empathy and compassion for the parent, even if the
Sure.
parent is driving them totally crazy and they're like, they don't understand me, they don't get it. All they want to do is fix. They just, I mean, a teen's not going to say they try to minimize my
Mhm,
problem, but they just like brush it to the side. They tell me to
mhm,
go for a walk or
mhm,
meditate when I'm anxious.
mhm,
It's so unhelpful. They don't understand. What I try to do is help the teen understand that the parent is doing the best that they can given the circumstance, and help educate the teen about kind of what we were talking about a few minutes ago, that it goes very against a parent's instinct to sit
mhm,
back and to
mhm,
really engage in this kind of two-sided
mhm,
dialogue.
mhm,
And I also remind the teen, again, of course, all of this is, very gentle and with compassion, and some teens are more receptive to it right off the bat than others. But reminding teens that the parents, in the way, are kind of in this sort of like muddled kind of gray area with parenting. Whereas when their teen was a kid or child, they really had to do a lot of fixing or providing a
mhm,
solution. When their teen was a baby, if the
mhm,
baby is crying, they're not going to say, like, let's talk about it. How can I
mhm,
support you?
mhm,
They're going to give them the bottle. They're going to change their
mhm,
diaper. They're going to
mhm,
take all those actions.
mhm,
And now the parents have to kind of relearn how to
mhm,
parent, and they're like, "Well, my teenager, I still think of them kinda like a kid, but they're kinda like an adult," that it's really hard for the parents too, so for the teen to also, do their best to also kind of keep that in mind, even if it's just like a small little,
mhm,
I don't know,
mhm.
a little sprinkle of
Yeah.
it, but it can be really helpful for them to say, "Okay, I get it. It's really annoying. I hate it, but, like, that makes sense," So, like, even that can kinda help both people work together.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I think they are completely, inextricably linked, the 2 of them, the
Yes,
teen and the parent, and they don't realize it. I
totally.
just started working with this family, and, the parent wanted to come in and, of course, dump all the negative crap, on me, and I said, "I'm not gonna do that," right? So, I always meet with the teen first, so they feel like, right, I'm joined with
Yeah.
them. And,
Mhm.
she, of course, says they're pretty much like sociopaths. And then I invite them in the room, and they're obviously not sociopaths. And then they kind of share their perspective. And I said, to her, I said, and to them, I was like, "Do you both see you ostensibly want the same thing, which is
Yeah.
safety? You just don't
Yes.
know how to go about it. You're
Yeah.
doing this, she's doing a lot of
Yeah.
middle fingers,
Mhm.
literally and figuratively, and engaging in, behaviors that suck them in." I was like, "You're like a vacuum cleaner, sucking them into this,
Mhm. Yep.
more kind of enmeshed dynamic that
Yes.
you want. And you're saying
Yes.
you want freedom, yet, honey," I was like, "you are asking for a smaller world. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know how you don't see that." You know what I mean? So it's like, let's work together and figure this crap out, because, and then I even said, it's perfect. It was so funny. I was like, it's a perfect example. let's look at the weekend to create like a winnable solution where as a match and she was like, "I'll come home when I wanna come home." I'm like, "Oh my god." I was like, like, that
You're like,
is
"Help me
not
out a little bit here."
yeah,
Yes.
like, that's what I said. I'm like, "I can't lawyer up for that. I can't lawyer up for that, honey." I'm like, "Lady, like, come on, like, I need like, you gotta give some,
Totally.
right, to get some." And
Yeah.
it's very hard, and I think the other thing that parents stink at, is this idea of being in 2 different places at the same time, or being 2 different places in the morning versus the evening versus the next day. Like that idea you
Mhm.
talked about earlier where you said, yes, be curious, be open, be more soliciting of their worldview, but it doesn't mean you're not gonna put your foot up their butt, or set a limit or a boundary.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Of
And
course.
parents, it's so funny. They're like, I always joke, it's kind of like they wake up and they're like, I'm going to be a heart centered mom today. It's all heart centeredness. And then it's like, no, I'm like, no, that's not, or like, I'm going to be an old
Yeah.
school dad. I'm going to be
Yeah.
an old school dad today. I'm going to be a, more traditional mom today, or I'm going to
Totally.
hold my kid accountable today. It's not that way. And it's like,
Yeah.
you wake up and you gotta give
Mhm.
what the you gotta respond to what the game is giving you, right?
Yes.
Which I always say parenting is like being again, used to be, executive, and I used to work a lot with executives in behavioral health, and I used to say, you know, being a great leader is having situational awareness. It's
Mhm.
using the right
Yes.
tact and tone with said employee at said moment,
Yes.
on said
Yes.
day, in said
Yes.
context. It's not like I'm leading from the front today, right? I'm leading from the back today, right? You're
Right.
always have to amalgamate something different, and that's hard
Definitely.
because the moment for a lot of the families I work with, there's a pill now that's been found. There's a vape that's been found. Bro
Yep.
is smoking a crap ton. It's not experimentation anymore.
Yes. Yes. It's very
What do we
different.
do there? Are we now all of a sudden going to drug test every day and turn our home into a recovery center, which I'm not
Yeah.
a fan
Right.
of, obviously.
Right.
And
Right.
I always say the moment we're wearing 85 million hats, the
Yeah.
warden, the recovery coach, the sober
So
police, the this,
hard.
they should not be in your house. And we got to work on, what is the right
100%.
therapeutic boarding school or treatment
100.
program
Yes.
or intervention. But again, it's so hard because I think, parents hear you potentially and they're like, oh, I'm going to just be this thing, this monolithic
Right.
thing. Or they
Right.
sometimes, when I work with families and I'll talk about, setting boundaries. And I always say, just so you know, you set boundaries with yourself before you set them with anybody. It's really an agreement
Mhm.
with
Of
yourself
course.
about how you're going to
Yes.
respond. And they're like, okay, cool. I got a hammer now. I'm like, no, it's like, that's not all you like. Don't just have the hammer,
Yes. Not black or white. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, it's such a
Mhm.
freaking hard job. It's such a
Yeah.
hard job. What have
Yeah.
you seen as the possibilities? Like what comes out of that? If I
Yes.
do inject more curiosity with my kid, what sell it? Sell the ROI of it. What happens?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, definitely. Well, and again, like I said, everything is situational, and I completely agree with your take on the kind of, the boundaries setting here. And I go into, extensive detail that in my book because oftentimes, I'll have parents that come to see me that, are like just totally checking the box with the curious approach. And, they have this very close relationship with their teenager and they're kind of the
Mhm.
teen's confidant, but then they really struggle in the kind of enabling sector.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we want to set boundaries. We don't want to restrict. We want to set boundaries though, and it's really important to keep that in mind. Having said all of that, my overall stance on taking this kind of curious approach, to supporting a teen and really working with them is the teen learns that the parent is a safe person that they can
Mhm.
talk to. They
Mhm.
feel that that their feelings are heard. They feel that maybe they're not going to be as judged. They feel that the parent is present for them and they're going to remember that for other situations
Mhm.
too, that it isn't just limited to, a conversation on
Mhm.
anxiety. Like they will
Mhm.
remember I can go to my parent when
Mhm.
something completely different happens when there's a crisis with, a relationship or substance
Mhm.
abuse or
Mhm.
something, like
Mhm.
they're going to keep this in the back of my mind. I remind parents all the time, the teens are usually not going to say that to their
Sure.
parent. They're not going to say, I'm so grateful that you're my
Right.
support person
Right.
and I feel so
Right.
safe. But they're remembering it. And the other piece is this is also helping facilitate independence and giving the teenager the life skills for becoming an adult, because when we go into the kind of fix it solution
Mhm.
mode,
Mhm.
what happens when the teen turns 18? What
Mm.
happens if the teen, decides to go to college or join the
Mhm.
workforce or move
Mhm.
out and they're used to having everything kind of fixed or solved for them.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
they haven't had the space to really, kind of process this out or come up with
Mhm.
some ideas on their own, with this, again, the support and guidance of their parent. But if it's been done for them, I think then, and this is a whole separate topic. This is actually my next book is on, is kind of we then get this sort
Mhm.
of failure to launch
Mhm. Of
type
course.
young
Yeah.
adult who
Yeah.
doesn't know how to do things on their own and they need their parents to fix everything. So
Mhm.
really, I really remind parents of this piece too is that even if it's really, really hard to remember this, so remember the kind of the importance of the taking the two-sided, open-ended questions, seeking to
Mhm.
learn, working with your teen, that it's
Mhm.
going to help them when they become an adult. They're gonna feel more confident navigating adulthood.
Yeah, if you have a second, check out, I don't even know, what is it? Because I'm forgetting where we are now by the time this comes out. I think it would be just 2 episodes ago, but it was, or maybe the last episode actually, with, Dr. Jack Hinman, and it was really funny because I have a TikTok account and some of the clips, same thing here, some of our clips will get posted, different sites, and, I kinda got hated on by some people, which is a sign of success
I was
because,
gonna say, I was like,
yeah,
"Good, shake
yeah,
things up,"
yeah, exactly,
That's when you know
because
you're doing it right. Yeah.
they didn't obviously listen to the whole interview with, Jack and I, and he talked about how the scaffolding actually he believes is, potentially promulgating more, ASD, high functioning diagnoses that aren't
Mm.
necessarily maybe even could that person could have maybe skirted that diagnosis
Oh,
potentially. And yeah,
fascinating.
not to say that I so this
Fascinating.
person wrote, oh, basically it was so funny. I was like, I called my wife. I'm like, people think I'm like RFK or something. This is great. I'm like, someone wrote, this guy thinks, iPads cause autism, and I went back at the person. I said, if you listen to the whole interview, in no way, shape, or form did I state that. However,
Sure.
what
As
we're
you type
talking
this on
about
your
is
iPad,
exactly
yeah.
what you're talking about. Is that if you're not helping your loved one have social emotional reciprocity, you're not helping your loved one have
Yeah,
life skills. If you're over
exactly.
scaffolding,
Yes.
right? If you're not doing this work you're talking about, which is injecting curiosity and listening and
Come
active
on.
listening, which is
Yes,
truly harder than just, telling them what to do, because you're
totally.
accompanying them in the journey, in the failing forward, in the hardship, in the
Mhm.
right, in the come up, then you're right. How are they going to rely, what core sense of self, what core tenets, tools, character, grit,
Yes.
resiliency are they going to have 18
Yep.
plus?
Yep.
And again, we know there are a litany of systemics,
Yes.
for more neurodivergent diagnoses, as well as we know there's a litany of systemics for why there is, I call it failing to leave parents.
Mm.
There's huge phenomenon right now
Yes.
of that.
Yes. It's
So
fascinating.
I love that idea that we can be relational and the relationality can germinate individuation, right? And that
Yes.
can germinate greater resiliency of our
Yes.
loved one. And it's kind of
Yes.
funny how it's almost like counterintuitive because we're like, oh, I'll give them the stuff,
Yep.
but you're like, no, 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 give them the relationship.
Yes.
And then together you kind of co-create the stuff, right?
Yes. Yes.
And then
Yes.
they have that
Exactly.
for life. And that's awesome.
Yes,
That's great.
yes. And I always kind of throw this out there too, which is that it's actually a really good time for parents to practice this, when the teen's also living at home, that
Mhm,
they know actually, okay, the teen is still safe, the teen
mhm,
is still living under my roof, I have, this kind of close connection here that this is a prime opportunity for me to practice this. And oftentimes, and I know this is a bit of a separate topic, but still connected, is parents will come to see me for therapy and they say, my teen is just so resistant.
mhm,
All of this sounds like a great idea. I love the
mhm,
idea of sitting
mhm,
down and having a conversation with my teen. I
mhm.
really want to help, work with them. I want to practice open-ended questioning and
Yeah.
active listening, but my team is completely closed off. My team's so resistant and my team won't get any support. What do I do? And of course, I say this in a non-judgmental way, and more compassion and more of a kind of mindful approach is encouraging the parent to really explore their own feelings and their own
Mhm.
anxieties and
Yeah.
maybe kind of like their own limits and
Mhm,
maybe ways
mhm.
that they can also recognize, okay, maybe I've been kind of putting out more of this sort of fearful based energy, or
Totally. Yeah.
maybe my teenager seeing me so anxious and so
Right.
stressed, and my
Right.
teen never sees me set
Right.
boundaries with people
Right.
or practice any
Right.
self-care or take a day off or say
Right.
no. And
Right.
that can be so empowering, obviously, not just for the parent. Those are great practices to start adopting, but the teen picks up on that, And again, the teen's not going to say, Mom, Dad, I'm so glad that you're setting boundaries and practicing self-care now. And, you seem
Of course.
more regulated, but the teen is going to note that.
You are way more professional than I would have been there. I would have just said you're super chicken shit,
You're
and
crazy. Yeah.
no, I would have said you're chicken shit, and I would have said stop being chicken shit, and I would have said inject what you want to see into the system, right? So
Right.
if you're afraid, like I had this family I was just working with, who the father was in active addiction a little while ago, is
Mhm.
in recovery now, and now
Mhm.
he wants to connect and he wants to whatever, and he's like got his panties in a wad, and I was like, buddy, like you were totally checked out for 6 years. Now you're
Yeah. It's
coming
gonna take some
to
time.
you're coming to your team. Great
Totally.
intention, love
Yes.
it, love it. However, yes, it's gonna take some time. So what we came up with is um the his daughter was oh my god, she was like a junior, and he actually was a college like counselor person.
Oh, okay.
And so I was like, dude, you're gonna bust the laptop open and you're gonna sit at the kitchen counter every Saturday at like whatever time she tends to like stroll into the kitchen. And if you're freaking late, that's on you. If you get all, finger in the wound because she doesn't want to sit down with you, that's on you.
Mhm.
And I said, you're just gonna show up and just be like, hey, if you want to, I'm here. We can kind
Yeah.
of chop it up. And of course, I said she's going to reject you when the smoke clears. She'll probably accept you, but it's like adoption, right?
Mhm.
And sure enough, it took like whatever. So what you just said to that woman there or person there, I don't know if you said woman or
So
dad,
many of them, hard to keep
whatever,
track.
whoever. No, no, no. The parent that you described, that
Yeah,
was like
totally.
so. That was great though because it's the same thing of like it drives me nuts when parents are so fragile around what their kids project or dump onto us. Like I
Yes.
must say 10 times a week, it's just words. Like
Yes.
the words don't matter.
Yeah.
Like
All bark, no bite.
it's
Yeah.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
always do this, like I do like foreground background. I'm always like,
Mhm.
this is always going to be really loud and scary and smelly and stanky. But what the hell's going on over here? And our job
Right.
is to just be like, whoop, right? So
Yes.
if
Yes.
she or he, whoever, I don't
Yep.
remember,
Mhm.
the parent kept being like, no, 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 tell me more. What's up? What's really going on? Or even things like I do a lot of what I call like feedback circles.
Mhm.
Did one
Mhm.
the other day with a family, and I was like, all right, we're gonna do like a 3-to-2 ratio, like three positive shout outs to two constructive feedbacks. And we went around and it was each person on that person.
Yeah.
So it's like so and
Fascinating.
so on so and so, right? The mom
Yeah.
on the kid, the
Yep.
dad on the kid. It was me on the kid. Then it's the kid on the mom, and then mom's in the hot seat, so to speak.
Mm.
Then everyone
Mhm.
goes around, dad's or dad and dad, or mom and mom, whatever the dynamic, or a single mom, whatever, or a single dad, whatever the
Mhm.
dynamic is. That even invites families to hear like constructive feedback,
Yes.
from
Yes.
the kid and to give it, because I can't
Definitely.
stand this idea too of like walking on eggshells
I
around,
know.
because that
It's not
exacerbates like
helpful.
right. And
Yeah.
what you're describing there is that person who's shut down, if the parent accepts that. Now, I'm not saying they go in there with a
Mhm.
freaking crowbar and a can opener, you know what I mean? But if
Sure.
they accept that over time,
Yes.
whew, that's a detached relationship, right?
Yes.
And now you have
Yes.
no circle of influence.
Yes.
And who the hell
Yes.
knows what's going on in that basement, right?
Right,
Or
right,
that
and that's
room or that
scary.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
scary. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's scary, and again, this also happens over time, so, and I know I keep kind of using this phrase, I remind parents of this all the time, but it's true, that I also encourage them to kind of, I know easier said than done, but kind of catch it while it's early, like,
Mhm.
even just, and this is, I might sound like a kind of silly example, but, this is one I often reference, which is, when I'm working, let's say, with a family where there's a younger teen. I mean,
Mhm.
I will say this happens also with older teens too, but
Mhm.
let's say,
Mhm.
there's a, you know, 13-year-old who's so anxious before school because of a test or something,
Mhm.
and the parent, so compassionate, so loving, they say, "Okay, well, stay home from school." And I've seen
Mm.
this multiple times in
Mm.
my private practice and from working at schools as a counselor.
Yeah,
The
no, hell
parents are
no.
emailing the teachers on
Mhm.
behalf of the
Mhm.
teen saying, my teen is struggling. Can the teen get, just extra credit or retake it? What does that teach the teen? And these are small ways that parents are enabling and rescuing that
Mhm.
then can later lead to those really scary
Mhm.
situations, like you said, of
Mhm.
what's going on in the basement,
Right.
where it's
Right.
like, it's not just
Right.
about, kind of jumping in and rescuing because it's a test. It's bigger than that, and of course, there are going to be situations where it's more appropriate to intervene. It's like,
Mhm.
let's say a teen calls and, says to the parent, "I'm in a really dangerous situation and I'm really, like I'm really fearful. I'm around some people who are doing
Mhm.
things illegal. Like, would you
Mhm.
come get me?" Of
Yeah, love that.
course,
Love
of
that. Yeah.
course, I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, it's amazing if a teen can do
Mhm.
that, and that can
Mhm.
happen,
Mhm.
and that's where it's really important for the parent to say, "Okay, yes, this is an appropriate situation for me to intervene. Let me get in the car. Let me go pick up my teen. Let's have a conversation about it after. Let's have follow-ups."
Mhm.
Again, totally appropriate, but then those kind of situations of jumping in and rescuing where it's not really necessary can add up and can lead to that kind of like walking on eggshells, the
Mhm.
rescuing, the
Mhm.
enabling, and that is not helpful for a teen's
Mhm.
growth, for their
Mhm.
self-esteem. It's
Mhm.
not helpful for their anxiety. It's good for teens to work through their anxiety.
100%. Again, I'm always positive, always strength based, always affirming, always flowing so much empathy to the parents I work with because it's the hardest job in the world. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm direct where I need to be because I always help families understand that there's an ROI to what the hell we're doing, right? And it's hard for
Mhm.
families who don't know the DSM like the back of their hand, like
Of
you and I
course.
do. However, I always say if we're dealing with a teen, the joy here is we have an axis one diagnosis, meaning
Yeah.
not axis
True.
two. Just for my listeners, axis two is where a personality disorder would get diagnosed. What are we up to? 13 now? 14? How many
I
we
know
got?
that's always changing, right?
I don't
Yeah.
even know. Maybe 16 by the time
Yeah.
this is over. I don't even know. Maybe whatever. But and I love, and there's levels not of personality disorders, which is super cool. From the
Mhm.
DSM-5, which it never was back in the day. I'm so old. I started DSM-3 TR, I think.
You know what? You're just
I
classic.
I think
That's
I
what it
think
is.
I think that's what I
Classically
said.
trained,
I think so.
classically trained.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, the D any rate, but, I might have yeah, I think that sounds right, and then maybe it was 4 was just coming out in grad school, um, but what's important for listeners to understand is that once something is in access to diagnosis, i.e. a personality disorder,
Mhm.
that's showing up in every relationship,
Yes.
incredibly hard to take down. There is hope, there is possibility there. But, if you ever hear things again from my listeners, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder,
Mhm.
antisocial personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder,
Yep.
dependent personality disorder, very difficult, right, for
Mhm.
that person to be functioning in a
Yes.
healthy way. So the
Yes.
beauty of teens, I
Mhm.
always say to these families I work with is, look, there's a cost of inaction, which looks
Yep.
like these symptoms getting rooted in your daughter, son, whoever character structure and becoming the way
Mhm.
they navigate. So that child just learned my anxiety is actually a good thing because it protects me
Mhm.
from having to face
Yes.
things that are hard.
Yes.
And mom and I just cooked a nice little a meshed codependent dynamic there where
Great.
she
Yes.
right where she flies really low and fights all my
Mhm.
battles. Over time, though, I'm gonna actually have to be depressed as well as a
Yes.
defense against the fact that I don't have a core sense of self. So now I
Right.
gotta have depression too,
Yep.
right? And then I
Yep.
gotta have da da da, and then I gotta have a lot of meds too, and then I gotta have so it's like
Yep.
by the time you track that trickle back to its source, it was as simple as,
Yep.
that parent saying, "I'm sorry that you're feeling all that. Tell me a little bit more. Yes, this does suck. Let's hold kind of the gray quality of this." I always say
Yes.
that versus black and white,
Yes.
and
I
let's
like
look
that.
at this as an opportunity
Yes.
and what can you do? What can't you do? And da, da,
Yes.
da, and let's disarm the hell out of it and get your butt to school, by the way, right? So,
Yes. Yes.
and then
Mhm.
that person doesn't have all these things that play out that potentially become highly problematic. So
100%.
the
100%.
yeah, so the opportunity, what I hear, and I want you to have a chance to, of course, kind of sell yourself, and what you do. But the opportunity here is, of course, for if someone's in the California, because you're licensed in California, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
So, and
Mhm.
you do virtual, right?
Yep.
So
Mhm.
if you're in California, right, you have
Mhm.
an amazing therapeutic option here for your tween
Mhm.
or teen, right?
Yep.
There's also, of course, your book, right, which is a
Yeah.
great resource
Thank you.
for parents as well, about how to hold that space, how to be more curious, how to inject. What I heard big time was a depth on the relationality side versus
Yes,
just trying to fix it or be transactional, and
definitely.
co-create kind of this more resilient human.
Yes, yes.
And then parents can reach out to you as well.
Yes, of
Yeah, yeah,
course,
yeah,
of
cool.
course. Yes,
Uh,
100%.
yeah, and
Well said. Yes.
well, and then what is your website so that folks
So
can.
it's yeah, so it's www.sophiagalano.com, and people can reach out to me anytime. You can, message me or follow me on Instagram too. That's Sophia Vale_Galano. And then my book is available, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Penguin Random House. I do bulk book sales through Porchlight Books, or if anyone's having difficulties finding it for any reason, they can reach out to me. There's also an audiobook version that's coming out in a few weeks.
Cool.
But really, the intention of the book is really to provide just kind of a blueprint and a guide for parents. There are very specific examples of, kind of situations where it's, rescuing versus enabling. There's very
Mhm,
specific phrases that are helpful when wanting to open up a dialogue with a teenager, how to start a conversation, how to get your teen talking. And there's also very specifics about what not to do, So again, the intention of the book is kind of this blueprint overview. And the book is written, in a way, or this was my intention, is, to be very accessible for readers. So I wrote it, with the intention that, a parent with a PhD could pick it up and
mhm.
it speak to them. And then the parent who, didn't finish high school can read it and say, oh, these are tools I can start using
Cool.
today. So very accessible, very approachable. And if anyone has any questions about what's in the book, they can also always reach out to me too.
I love that. Well, you were an amazing guest, and I'll do my
Oh,
little
thank you.
PSA, which I always do as well, which is anybody out there listening who has a loved one, whether they are tween, teen, or young adult, who is struggling to step, whether it's to step into adulthood, or they're struggling with mental health or addiction, or they're struggling with just mood regulation or disruptive behaviors, please don't go it alone. You obviously
Yes.
have this podcast as a free guide. You clearly have the book that was just described as well. Go check that out. You could hop on the fourpeaksparents.com website, sign up for the newsletter where you get tips, tools, strategies, all tactical, helpful, practical parenting tips right to your inbox. And if anybody is concerned about their loved one and is not sure, right, if they need to intervene and is worried about where the hell this is going to go, there is an ROI toward health if we work together. There is also a cost of inaction if you don't, not just with me, but in general. Please take action. Big fan of taking action and
Yes.
addressing things. So anybody who wants to jump on a free discovery call with me, they can. Just go to fourpeaksparents.com. Sophia, you were amazing guest.
Oh,
Thank
well,
you, thank
thank
you, thank you.
you.
I hope
Thank you for having
everybody,
me.
yeah, I hope everybody, like, my big takeaway is, again, like, more curiosity, better questions. Also, don't give up right at first blush.
Yes.
Kind of
Yes.
keep going. Don't say what the hell's wrong with you. you know,
Even if you think it, it's fine. Yeah.
right? And just accompany, and massage and motivate
Yes.
and support your kiddo to solve their own problems. So, thank you so much.
Totally. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Bye.